Hello and welcome to Independent Thinking, the weekly podcast from Chatham House. I'm Bronwen Maddox, the director. This week we're going back to India as we said we would, and we're going to talk about the outcome of the recent state elections. With the general election just months away, Narendra Modi and his party, the BJP, won quite a few of the 5 state elections whose results were announced this week. And that seems to confirm the BJP's control over what has been called the Hindu heartlands in the country. But is that the full story? We're going to suggest not, and we'll take a closer look at what happened and why it matters to India and indeed to the world beyond its largest democracy. We're also going to examine larger questions about India's democracy and ask how the country has changed after a decade of rule by Narendra Modi and the BJP, and specifically the impact of the type of Hindu nationalism espoused by his governments. Well, I've got a great group of people here. Joining me down the line from New Delhi is Nishtha Gautam. Welcome to the podcast, Nishtha.
Thank you so much, Bronwen.
Great. It's a chance for us to continue the conversation we began over breakfast in Delhi about a month ago.
Absolutely.
Joining me also this week is Professor Louise Tillin from King's College London's India Institute. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great. And you were telling me that you're just finishing a book on India's welfare regime.
Yes, that's right.
Great. When?
I'm just indexing it right now, so it should be out next
That
year.
really is the last
Yes.
stages.
Yeah.
And I'm delighted we've got with us again Chitej Bajpai, the Senior Research Fellow for South Asia here at Chatham House, writing on all things about this for us.
Hi, Bronwen. Good to be back.
Really good to have you all here. Well, let's start with talking about what this week's results mean for Modi. And I wonder, Louise, if you could take us into this, which states went to the polls and what the results were.
Sure. So we've just had this week the results of 5 state elections, which is a large batch. And these are pivotal polls because they're the last batch of elections before next year's general elections in India. So they're always seen as crucial bellwether states. We've got a mixture of states, 3 states in India's Hindi-speaking heartland, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, neighbouring states, and Rajasthan. The 4th state was a southern state, the southern state of Telangana, formerly part of Andhra Pradesh, a new state that was created only in 2014. The 5th was a smaller northeastern state called Mizoram. And the results are a mixed picture. Of course, the headline, which has really grabbed attention, has been the BJP's success, its sweep of those major Hindi heartland states, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, and Rajasthan. Most people expected the BJP would probably win one of those states. It was less certain that they would win all 3. So, and I think we're going to get into this in more detail, the results there obviously raise a lot of questions about the state of play ahead of the general elections, the condition of the Congress party, the electoral strategy that the Congress party pursued in those elections, and really how we understand the outcomes of Indian elections now, obviously in a very changed environment since the consolidation of power by the Modi-led BJP in 2014. The 4th state was that of Telangana, which was actually a good news story for the Congress party. No one really expected the Congress party to win this state. It had been held since the state's creation by the regional party, what used to be called the Telangana Rashtriya Samiti, relatively recently renamed itself the Bharatiya Rashtriya Samiti in a bid to present itself or to cross the line between its status as a regional party and a national party. The Congress party defeated the BRS in its only homeland state. And so this was a really good news story for the Congress party. And in Mizoram, we saw the victory of a regional party against the BJP-led NDA alliance. So very different stories playing out in different parts of India, which remind us that India remains a very pluralistic electoral scene with state-specific issues determining outcomes in different parts of the country. That doesn't mean to say national issues aren't important, though.
We'll come on to the national issues. But Nishtha, what did you make of these results and this picture? Were you surprised?
Absolutely not. And you may recall our conversation last month in New Delhi, how I was, basically expressing my disappointment with many of my peers, who always tend to take on the mantle of an astrologer and say that, okay, this is what is going to happen in the next elections and hawa badal rahi hai. This is the favorite catchphrase of all the apologists or political analysts, which roughly translates as, winds are changing. For whom, really? So it did not come as a surprise to me at all. And Chitej and I were actually texting each other on the day of the counting, said that, it's actually going along the predicted lines. It's very easy to say, with Rahul's Rahul Gandhi's Bharat Jodo Yatra, Congress is picking up momentum, and this is what is happening. And I would disagree with Louise here that it was actually a big win or a big positive for Telangana, because that one state was actually along the predicted lines as well, because BRS was so unpopular in the last 1 year, and BJP does not really have a footprint in Telangana. Even though, when you go back to the genesis of the state, yes, BJP had a role to play there, but there was a lot of local sort of politics at play there.
That's very helpful. So not surprising, could have been foreseen, even though it wasn't.
No.
Chittaj, what does this mean, and what does it mean in particular for Modi?
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of people tend to frame these state elections as the semifinals for next year's general elections, and I don't think that's entirely accurate. There's no direct correlation between state and national elections. The best example of this is what we saw happen back in 2018, where the BJP lost these same three state elections and then went on to win the parliamentary elections. And in 2003, it actually won these same three state elections, then went on to lose the parliamentary elections in 2004. So I think it's important not to read too much into the state election outcomes.
On the other hand, let me say, one of the reasons we decided to do this podcast, and when we were last doing an India podcast, was because of the significance of these state elections, perhaps for showing whether Modi's power might be constrained, even if he goes on to win the general election. And I was just wondering what you felt that we could read into this. Perhaps very little.
Well, I think, there are several, important implications. Beyond next year's parliamentary elections, these state elections also matter because they determine the composition of the upper house of parliament, the Rajya Sabha, where the BJP is yet to secure a majority. And these states aren't insignificant states. They count for 83 seats within the 543-seat Lok Sabha. So they are important elections. I think the BJP is definitely in a stronger position going into 2024 than it was going into the previous election in 2019. The economy is in better shape, as we've discussed. It's won these elections, which it lost the last time around. So I think the BJP is definitely in a stronger position, but I wouldn't put a direct correlation between state election outcomes and the national election.
Louise, you're nodding, and you were talking about the complexity of this picture. How would you describe the significance of these results?
Well, at an event last week at Chatham House, asked about the potential significance of the outcome, I said these election results will be more important for the Congress Party than they are for the BJP. Pretty much whatever happens, and we saw this in 2018, the BJP will be able to ride out the outcome of these elections. What I think we've seen for Congress is a multi-part story. The Congress Party vote hasn't collapsed. And that's very important to remember. The BJP won, for instance, the state of Rajasthan on a very narrow margin of less than 2%, and the Congress Party actually increased its vote share on 2018. So this is not a story of Congress Party collapse, but it is a story of the Congress Party's difficulty in a first-past-the-post system of converting its vote share, which in the state of Rajasthan was almost 40%, and wasn't too much less than that in Madhya Pradesh and in Chhattisgarh, into seats. And this is a consequence of India's voting system, much like our own in the UK. The winner has a great advantage when it comes to forming the state assembly. Congress vote share hasn't collapsed. What we have seen in these states is that and we're only just getting the post-poll data, so we don't know the full picture in all the states yet. But from what we've seen so far, the Congress Party has managed to hold on, even gain among lower class, lower caste communities. The BJP has consolidated its standing amongst upper caste, dominant caste communities. So this is fairly classic fault lines, and it's what we'd expect to see in the Hindi heartland. So the story is not clear-cut in terms of what it means for the Congress. What it certainly will mean, though, is that the politics of the India alliance, the main opposition alliance, which had been starting to take shape in the months before these elections, will become much more complicated because the Congress Party no longer looks...
Do you mean unsuccessful?
Potentially, yes. Yeah. The Congress Party refused to enter into alliances with its coalition partners in that alliance before these state elections. And so now agreeing the seat-sharing arrangement, which these parties had promised to do ahead of the Lok Sabha polls, is going to look even more difficult than it already was.
Nishtha, just take us into that predicament of the opposition. Months and months they've been already about talking about seat sharing and whether that could be got together ahead of the general election. What do you make of the state of the opposition and particularly of the Congress Party now?
Well, actually, Congress Party only has itself to blame. I have always maintained that when it comes to state elections, Congress Party always tends to overplay its hand. whenever there is a question of seat sharing, whether it is in Uttar Pradesh or elsewhere, and because I come from Uttar Pradesh, so I follow the politics very, very closely there. There's always this sense of this grandeur, which is totally unfounded on the party's ability to win elections. And there are these gestures, and that is going to be the death of this very ambitious alliance. Because why would the regional party play a second fiddle to a party that is, I agree that there is the vote share is intact, but it is not translating into seats. So why would you want to carry that kind of dead weight? Congress party always wants to contest on more seats that it can win, or possibly even mount a credible opposition. So it's a very, very strange situation. I don't know who to blame, because it's very easy to put.
Well, I'm going to ask you actually, because I love your phrase about the sense of grandeur of the Congress party, and I wondered whether you thought the Gandhi dynasty took some responsibility for that, and for what you're suggesting is a really lack of reality about the current state of the party.
Absolutely. I think the Gandhis are to blame, and Ram Guha has said it more succinctly and more angrily, I dare say, in his last interview. And he was pretty clear how this duo of Rahul Gandhi and Priyanka Gandhi and all their coterie have actually brought Congress to this day where the party has absolutely no credibility even as a local alliance partner.
And you're talking as an election-winning machine.
Absolutely. They are no election-winning machine, and also they play the similar kind of politics that the BJP plays, Bronwen, and I think that's very important, but they cannot win an election playing that kind of politics.
So, Chuta, does Modi face, looking ahead to next year's election, really any significant opposition?
Frankly, I would say no, but the BJP-led, a Modi-led BJP government looks even more likely. Its strength really rests on these four pillars: the Hindutva, the Hindu nationalism, hyper-nationalism, its welfare and development-driven agenda, and the Modi brand. And the opposition have struggled to replicate these four factors. I think the government, Modi's approval rating has been recently reported to be the highest among 22 world leaders. The BJP has an overwhelming funding advantage. And if they win, Modi will be the first prime minister since Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister, to secure 3 consecutive national elections. So not even Indira Gandhi, his daughter, was able to secure this.
And we had flickering through our conversation earlier mention of the economy, which is doing very well. And this is one thing that Modi's supporters point to, is saying, look, it's been very, very good for India's growth.
Yeah, so one of the points that the BJP used to campaign on in the state elections, or one of the campaign slogans that they use, was double engine ki sarkar, which essentially means that if you have the same party ruling at the state and national level, it's going to help to strengthen growth and development in your state. So I think that has been a very strong part of the narrative for the BJP.
And Louise, I'm tantalized by your book on welfare. And welfare is one of the things that the BJP has really managed to crack, in the sense of getting payments into people's, I'm not going to say hands, but actually onto their phones.
Yes, this is certainly part of the BJP's election machine and strategy, is the very careful honing of direct benefit transfers and the use of
This is money from the government going, never mind through a bank account, just arriving in people's phones. Here's the benefits you're always entitled to, thanks to the Modi government.
Yes, although the opposition opposition-ruled governments are doing the same thing. And in fact, the Congress...
A very important point to remind us of.
And much of the contest that goes on in these state elections is a competition for who gets the credit over these welfare schemes, which are being provided both by state governments and the national government. Where I did want to come in on the economy, though, was, I think, so India, of course, bright spot in the global economy, fastest growing emerging economy. What we don't have a very good handle on, and this is because of the suppression of statistical operations in India, are poverty rates. We don't have recent poverty data, and unemployment rates. And yet we know from survey after survey that these are the issues that matter most to voters. So if you ask voters going to the polls in these elections, what is the most important issue for you? It's jobs and it's inflation. It's cost of living pressures, right? And so there are structural issues facing the Indian economy, rising inequality, which are not at the moment being directly expressed through electoral politics, but they matter. And we mustn't lose sight of them in the bigger picture.
That is a really important reminder. And Nishtha, looking ahead to next year's elections, then what are the kind of factors you think are at play? And do you regard it as a certain outcome, or do you think there really is quite a bit of unpredictability about it?
No, I don't see any unpredictability about it. I think Mr. Modi is going to come back, and I've been saying it for the past 5 years that there is absolutely no reason why he won't come back unless the opposition gets its act together, and they have failed at it time and again. So it is actually a very, very dismal picture.
Unless you like Modi.
I do not come here as a supporter or a critique of Modi, but it's just that it is a very, very dismal picture for any democracy, that there is no credible opposition. And when it comes to what Louis says is absolutely correct. We are looking at a structural problem with the Indian economy, and it is the issue of inequality, that too much is concentrated in too few hands.
If I could just add one caveat, and that is that the BJP does not have to lose for the opposition to win. So while the BJP is likely to win next year's election, it'll probably secure over the 272-seat mark to form a government. It's still possible that it could win with a slightly weaker mandate. So for instance, if it secures less than 300 seats, that would potentially, to some extent, dent the Modi brand, make it more beholden to coalition partners. So I think that is probably the key watch point. Whether they win or lose is not really the question, is whether they get that overwhelming mandate in the election, I think is going to be an important watch point.
So let's turn at this point to the second flank of our question and look at what another term led by Narendra Modi would look like. Louise, what does that look like to you?
Well, some of the answer to this will hinge on the answer to the question that Chitij has just framed for us. What does the election victory look like? And I think then the scenario, an emboldened BJP, which has seen a repeat of its 2019, the scale of its 2019 victory, may go in for some very bold moves, which have the potential to even further reshape the fabric of Indian democracy, society, and
what kind of things are you thinking of?
So I think there are two big things that we anticipate. The first is the rearrangement of parliamentary constituencies. India anticipates redrawing parliamentary constituencies by 2026. And this will update the allocation of seats that different states have in the Indian parliament from the currently used the 1971 population data. I won't go into the history as to why, but the consequence of redesigning parliamentary constituencies will be that northern states in the Hindi heartland, which are the BJP's core constituency, will increase in number. And the number of seats allocated to southern states, which tend to be governed by regional parties or the Congress party, will reduce in number. So the political consequences will be to harden a north-south fault line in Indian politics. This has profound potential consequences for Indian federalism. Questions around the redistributive fabric of Indian fiscal federalism at the moment.
How much money the centre gives to different parts of the country and which ones it favours, if you like.
And who pays the taxes that then are redistributed. So at the moment you have southern richer states paying more in taxes, which are then redistributed to poorer northern states. We already know that system has been under quite a lot of tension, but with delimitation on the anvil, those kinds of questions will become much, much more fiery. The other major social issue, which the BJP may move on, but we don't know yet, is the question of a uniform civil code. So this would be an attempt to create uniform personal laws in India. At the moment, different religious communities can operate their own personal laws for marriage, for inheritance, and divorce, and so on. The uniform civil code has been one of the three big social questions that have been on the BJP's manifesto for election after election. It's the only one that hasn't yet been fulfilled. They have gone slow in recent months because of fears of opposition and concern amongst tribal constituencies, which are an important part of the BJP's electoral coalition. But I think an emboldened BJP after the Lok Sabha elections may go in for something big like this. So we don't know as yet, but I think Modi with a big mandate will want to do something bold.
Nishtha, are you concerned about these points?
Well, of course, everybody with a thinking mind needs to be concerned about these eventualities. But let me talk about UCC first. The problem with the UCC...
This is the Universal Civil Code that Louise has just beautifully described for us.
Yes,
thank you.
So it is. We do not have a draft yet. So we cannot even say whether UCC comes from a place, which is bona fide in nature, or that there is something cunning at play.
By a bona fide place, you would mean the government saying something like, look, this is simply going to unify the treatment of all Indians, and by cunning you might mean, look, is it meant to discriminate
against the minorities? Yes. So there is unless there is a draft on the table, we cannot ascribe any motive, whether bona fide or mala fide, to the government. When it comes to delimitation, I think Louis summarized it very, very well, that there is already a simmering tension. Why should the southern states be punished for good behavior? Why should they be subsidizing for the northern states that have fallen so badly behind on all possible social indices? Look at Bihar, look at Uttar Pradesh. Rajasthan has been moving up. So, kudos to the governments, both the Congress party and the BJP governments, because they have been pretty good at alleviating certain socio-economic issues.
But a lot of the big technology engine that is driving India's economy, a lot of that is in the south.
Absolutely.
Kshitij, people talk a lot, particularly outside India, well, inside as well, about democratic backsliding and so on, that India's democracy is not in good shape. And there are many retorts to this. Where do you see this argument?
So I definitely agree. I mean, there's a degree of truth in these allegations, democratic backsliding or the government pursuing authoritarianism by stealth. But, if you look at the conduct of these state elections, they show that India's democracy still remains quite vibrant. We've seen 11 state elections over the last 11 months. Voter turnout has been over 70%. We've seen fewer recounts, fewer allegations of vote rigging or manipulation. So I think, democracy remains quite well entrenched in Indian society, and it can't be overturned. And then one other point to add is India has become less liberal, but it's arguably become better governed. And I think the key point here is the issue of digital public infrastructure, which has helped to streamline welfare disbursements, access to health, education, and banking services, and reduce the space for corruption. I think this is another factor which has helped to get the BJP reelected.
Louise, how should we calibrate an answer to this question? Because you hear a lot. I'm thinking of one very senior Indian businessman who said to me, oh, look, the rest of the world, democracies, and the BBC all exaggerate this question of the state of India's democracy, which is absolutely fine. What should we make, sitting in a democracy outside India, what should we make of this?
Well, I think, part of the answer to this has to involve introspection at our side as well. Democracy is under pressure all over the world, right? And, India's government does push back very strongly against, organizations like Freedom House or VDEM, which are, responsible for producing these global rankings of democracy, to say, well, you kind of got it wrong, and we have, had no attempt to thwart the outcome of an election in India, but look at what's happened, what happens in the US and Brazil. I mean, so as Kshitij says, elections as a mechanism for garnering public opinion are still working and translated into election outcomes. Where I think we can't be deterred, however, though, from looking at the implications of what is happening in India's electoral democracy for the quality of and robustness of India's institutional life. But, if we look at the enormous pressure that has been placed on all manner of independent institutions, whether it's the courts, whether it's India's universities, where especially in the social sciences, there's been enormous restriction of academic freedom. Institutional, appointments across the board in India have become very heavily politicized, and there's a wider cultural agenda at play here, which is changing the fabric of Indian institutional life and of Indian society. So while I, have some degree of sympathy from, about, or at least understanding of the pushback that we receive from the Indian government about critiques of India's democratic backsliding, these are questions of profound importance for India's health as a thriving economy, as a place in which the rule of law thrives, which we can't simply brush under the carpet.
Just to add one point, in terms of the response by the international community, I think ultimately we need to look at this through the lens of realpolitik or geopolitics as well. So India's illiberal or imperfect democracy will ultimately trump China's one-party authoritarianism. So as long as India continues to be seen as a bulwark against the rise of China, concerns about democratic backsliding will, I think, continue to be downplayed in the West. And for that to really change, there would need to either be a significant surge in communal or religious unrest within India, or a spillover of the Hindutva or Hindu nationalist agenda into the foreign policy domain.
Those are all questions we're going to look at next year, which is the record bumper year of elections as far as anyone can count. I think 76, there may be more short-term ones ones called at short-term notice as well, and maybe 40-something of those one would call very robust democracies, but the rest very much up for discussion. And we'll be discussing, right through the year, and in fact, in our final podcast of the year, some of those main points raised by it, which Chitesh was just taking us into. We're going to have to stop there on this one, but obviously more to come on all this. A big thank you to my guests, Dr. Chitesh Bajpai, Professor Louise Tillen, author and writer Nishtha Gautam. Do follow them all on Twitter, and the links are in the show notes as usual. And a reminder that you can find all of our podcasts on Apple, Spotify, all major platforms, as well as through our social media. So do like, follow, subscribe. Do leave us a review. That's how I'll spend my Christmas, reading them. Also, come and read more from our experts and find out more about our events. We've got lots and lots coming in the new year. And you can find all that at chathamhouse.org. And you can find all the work of all our programs there, including our Asia Pacific program. And with Christmas fast approaching, if you haven't done your shopping, why not give the gift of a Chatham House membership to one of your family or friends? We'd love to see them at our events, in person, online, and you too. So hope that you take us up on that. You can find the offer as well in the show notes. That's goodbye for me, Bronwen Maddox. Thank you for listening.